Ellen DeGeneres stopped mid-laugh, her eyes locked on the 16-year-old sitting across from her, with a presence that seemed far older than his years. The studio lights caught the quiet confidence in Jordan Williams' posture, but Ellen could see something else, a depth that came from surviving something most adults never face. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become the most inspiring moment in daytime television history. Because sometimes, when wisdom meets experience, and pain transforms into purpose, magic doesn't just happen, it changes lives across the world. Nobody in that Warner Bros. Studio knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. Not the cameras rolling, not the producers frantically checking their notes, and certainly not Jordan Williams, who thought he was just there to talk about his small speaking business that helped bullied kids find their voice. But Ellen knew. Ellen had been planning this moment for 4 weeks, ever since a viral video had made her call someone whose own story of transformation had inspired millions. The video was only 3 minutes long, shot on a phone in a high school auditorium. In it, Jordan Williams, tall for his age, with kind eyes and a voice that carried surprising authority, was speaking to a room full of teenagers about something most adults struggle to understand: how to turn your worst day into your greatest strength. But what made the video go viral wasn't just his words. It was the moment at the end when a girl in the audience stood up and said, "You saved my life. I was going to hurt myself, but listening to you made me want to try one more day." But this is where the story gets incredible. Because Will Smith had seen that video, Ellen had seen that video, and what they decided to do about it would transform not just Jordan's life, but how America thought about young people, about resilience, about the power of turning pain into purpose. Now, as Jordan sat in that familiar blue chair wearing his best suit, a thrift store find that he'd saved up for months to buy, he had no idea that his hero was watching backstage, equally amazed by this teenager's wisdom. Ellen leaned forward, her characteristic energy subdued by genuine curiosity. "Jordan, you're 16 years old, but you speak like someone who's lived multiple lifetimes. Where does that come from?" Jordan smiled, the kind of smile that had learned to find light in dark places. "I think pain has a way of aging you really fast, Ellen, but I also learned that if you're going to carry that pain anyway, you might as well use it to help somebody else." The studio audience was already captivated. This wasn't typical teenage conversation. There was something about Jordan's presence that commanded attention, not through volume or performance, but through authenticity. "Tell me about the moment you decided to start speaking to other kids." Jordan's expression shifted slightly, accessing a memory that still carried weight. "I was 14, sitting in my bedroom after another really bad day at school. I'd been bullied for months, kids making fun of my clothes, my voice, the fact that I lived with my grandmother because my parents, well, they weren't around, and I was writing what I thought might be my last letter." The studio went quiet. Ellen felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just a success story. This was a survival story. I had the letter written, and I was sitting there thinking about whether anyone would miss me. And then I heard my grandmother downstairs watching one of your old shows, Ellen, and I could hear her laughing, and I thought if my pain could make even one person not feel so alone, maybe that would be enough reason to stay. Ellen's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away from Jordan. "What happened next? I started writing different letters to kids like me. I posted them online, just hoping maybe one person would read them and feel less alone. And then I started getting messages from kids all over the country saying they'd been in that same dark place, and somehow my words helped them choose to stay." Jordan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is one of those letters. I carry it with me to remind myself why I do what I do." He unfolded it carefully and read, "Dear Jordan, I'm 13 and I thought I was the only kid in the world who felt invisible. Your video about turning pain into power made me realize that maybe being different isn't something to fix, maybe it's something to celebrate. I'm still here because you showed me that my story isn't over. Thank you for saving my life." The silence in the studio was profound. Camera operators were wiping their eyes. Audience members were holding each other. This 16-year-old had just shared something more powerful than most adults could articulate. But Ellen wasn't just listening as a talk show host anymore. She was listening as someone who was about to facilitate a conversation between this young man and someone who had built a career on the same philosophy, turning struggles into strength, using fame to inspire others, proving that our greatest pain can become our greatest purpose. "Jordan," Ellen said, standing up from her chair, "there's someone here who's been watching your video for weeks, someone who knows exactly what it feels like to transform pain into purpose, to use your platform to help others believe in themselves." Jordan looked confused, a flicker of hope crossing his face. Someone who helps people believe in themselves. Ellen walked toward the wings of the stage, and the studio audience began to buzz with anticipation. They could sense something massive was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellen announced, her voice carrying across the studio with unusual gravity, "please welcome someone who has spent his entire career proving that our greatest struggles become our greatest strengths. Will Smith." The studio exploded. 300 people jumped to their feet, screaming, applauding, the sound practically shaking the building. But Ellen was watching Jordan, who had gone completely still. His mouth fell open, his hands gripped the arms of his chair, and then tears started flowing down his face. Will Smith walked onto that stage with the presence of someone who had faced his own demons and come out stronger. But he wasn't carrying his usual larger-than-life energy. He was carrying something more powerful, focused, purposeful intensity aimed directly at the young man sitting in that chair. "Jordan," Will said, his voice carrying that distinctive warmth that had made him beloved worldwide, "I've been watching your videos for a month straight, brother, and I've got some things to say to you." Jordan couldn't speak. He was shaking, tears streaming down his face, staring at the man whose movies had gotten him through some of his darkest nights, whose music had taught him that it was okay to be different, whose life story had shown him that transformation was possible. But this is where the story becomes something nobody expected. Something that would change not just Jordan's life, but how millions of people thought about young leadership, about the wisdom that comes from survival, about the responsibility that comes with having a voice. Will didn't sit down. Instead, he knelt in front of Jordan's chair, bringing himself to eye level with this teenager who had somehow found a way to turn his worst experiences into hope for others. "Jordan, can I tell you something? When I was your age, I thought I was the only kid in the world who felt like an outsider. I thought being different was a curse. I thought the pain I was carrying was just waste, something to hide, something to be ashamed of." The studio audience was completely silent now, watching two people, one a global superstar, one a teenager, connect on a level that transcended fame or age. "But what you've figured out at 16 took me 30 years to understand. You've learned that our pain isn't punishment, it's preparation. You've learned that the things that make us different aren't flaws, they're superpowers. And most importantly, you've learned that healing happens when we help others heal." Will reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made Jordan gasp. It was a printed screenshot of one of Jordan's videos, but it had been signed and annotated. "I printed this out and I've been carrying it with me for 3 weeks, Will said, handing it to Jordan. "Because what you said in this video reminded me why I do what I do. You said your story isn't happening to you, it's happening for you, so you can help write someone else's happy ending." Jordan took the paper with trembling hands, reading Will's handwritten note. To Jordan, "You are exactly the leader this generation needs. Your wisdom is a gift. Your voice matters. Keep speaking. Keep healing. Keep changing lives. Your brother in purpose, Will." But Will wasn't finished. He looked at Ellen, who nodded, then back at Jordan. "Jordan, speaking to kids in school auditoriums is beautiful work. But I want to help you reach more people. I want to help you build something bigger." The audience was holding its breath, sensing something significant was about to happen. "I'm launching a new initiative called Voices of Tomorrow, a platform specifically for young people like you who have turned their struggles into strength. I want you to be our first featured speaker, not as a kid with potential, as a teacher with wisdom." Jordan started crying harder, but they were tears of disbelief, of dreams suddenly becoming possible, of validation from someone he'd looked up to for years. "But most importantly," Will continued, his voice dropping to something more intimate, more personal, "I want to be your mentoring partner. Not your mentor, your partner. Because honestly, brother, I think you might have some things to teach me." The studio erupted again, but this time the celebration felt different. This wasn't just applause for a heartwarming moment. This was recognition of something rare, a young person whose wisdom had impressed one of the most successful people in entertainment. Ellen stepped forward, her own face streaked with tears. "You know what, folks? This is why we do this show. Not for the entertainment, though we love that too, but for moments like this. Moments when we remember that wisdom doesn't come from age, it comes from experience. And Jordan has more real experience at 16 than most of us have at 60. She turned to Jordan, who was still holding Will's signed photo like a treasure. "Jordan, you said you started speaking because you wanted to make sure no kid felt as alone as you did. Mission accomplished. But now you get to do something even bigger. You get to show the world what young leadership looks like." The show ended with Jordan, Ellen, and Will in a three-way embrace. But the image that would be shared millions of times was simpler. Will Smith, one of the biggest stars in the world, kneeling in front of a 16-year-old, both of them understanding that real strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from transforming it into purpose. 6 months later, Jordan Williams had spoken to over 100,000 young people across the country through the Voices of Tomorrow platform. His TED Talk, Why Your Worst Day Might Be Your Best Teacher, has been viewed over 10 million times, but more importantly, he's received over 50,000 messages from teenagers saying his words helped them choose to stay, to fight, to believe in their own story. But the real transformation wasn't just in Jordan's reach, it was in his confidence. Working with Will Smith hadn't just given him a platform, it had given him permission to own his voice, to trust his instincts, to believe that his age didn't disqualify his wisdom. Will kept his promise about partnership. Every few weeks, he and Jordan connect to discuss not just Jordan's speaking career, but Will's projects too. "This kid sees things I miss," Will said in a recent interview. "He reminds me that the most powerful teachers are often the ones who've just learned the lesson themselves." Ellen keeps a photo from that day in her dressing room. Will kneeling in front of Jordan, both of them crying, both of them understanding that pain shared becomes strength multiplied. Every time she looks at it, she remembers why her platform exists, not just to entertain, but to elevate voices that might otherwise go unheard. And Jordan, he still carries that letter from the 13-year-old who said he saved her life. But now he carries hundreds more, from kids across the world who've learned that their story isn't over, that their pain has purpose, that their voice matters. The thrift store suit he wore that day has been retired, replaced by clothes that fit his new reality, but he keeps it in his closet as a reminder of where he came from, of the boy who almost gave up but chose to stay and help others stay too. Because that's what Will Smith, Ellen DeGeneres, and Jordan Williams taught the world that day. That the most powerful voices often come from the deepest pain, that wisdom isn't about age, it's about willingness to learn from struggle and share those lessons with others, and that sometimes the teacher you need most is the one you least expect. The letter Jordan was going to write that dark night 2 years ago was never sent. Instead, he's written thousands of others, letters of hope, letters of encouragement, letters that remind young people that their story is still being written, and they get to decide how it ends. Share this story if you believe young people have wisdom worth hearing. Comment below if you've ever turned your pain into purpose. And remember, your worst day might just be preparing you for your greatest mission. You just have to be brave enough to stay and find out. Because in the end, that's what happened in that studio that day. A teenager who survived his worst nightmare became a voice for millions, all because he learned that the most powerful question isn't why me, but how can I use this to help someone else? The pain that almost ended Jordan's story became the foundation for thousands of others to keep writing theirs. And that, it turns out, is the most beautiful transformation of all.